Mom, don't come to my wedding. I don't need you anymore. Laura's words still echoed in my ears as I held the phone with trembling hands. My daughter, my only child, had just spat 28 years of sacrifice in my face with the coldness of a stranger. It hadn't been an argument or a misunderstanding. It had been a planned, calculated, and ruthless execution. I had arrived at her apartment with the dress I'd chosen for her wedding, a navy blue dress I had bought with the money I'd saved to fix my roof. I rang the doorbell with a smile, also carrying a box of chocolate cupcakes that I'd baked all night, her favorite since she was a little girl. I wanted everything to be perfect for the most important day of her life. I wanted to be the mother she deserved, just as I had always tried to be. But when she opened the door, her eyes held no warmth, only the coldness of a verdict. Michael was standing behind her with that smirk I had learned to hate. And for the first time, I understood that I hadn't arrived for a family visit. I had walked into an ambush. If you're watching this video, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. We need to talk, Laura said without inviting me in, not even looking at the box of cupcakes that was getting heavy in my arms. Her voice sounded different, as if she had rehearsed those words in front of a mirror, as if they weren't truly hers. "What's wrong, my love?" I asked, trying to stay calm, even though something in my chest already knew I was about to receive the hardest blow of my life. "I've been thinking a lot, and I think it's better if you don't come to the wedding," she blurted out, like someone yanking off a Band-Aid. "Michael and I have decided that we want to start our married life without any drama, without any toxicity. I need space to grow as a person." Toxicity? Drama? The words hit me like stones. I, who had worked double shifts to pay for her college. I, who had even sold my mother's wedding ring to pay for her design degree. I, who had slept on other people's sofas when we lost our house because I preferred she not realize how bad off we were financially. Toxicity? I repeated, feeling my voice break. "Laura, I'm your mother. I raised you alone. I gave you everything I had and more than I didn't have." "Precisely because of that," Michael said, stepping forward and placing his possessive hand on my daughter's shoulder. "Laura needs to free herself from that emotional burden. You've always made her feel guilty for your sacrifices. That's emotional manipulation." Emotional manipulation. There it was, the cheap psychological jargon that had been poisoning my daughter. I immediately recognized the words that weren't coming from Laura's mouth, but from his. "Laura," I said, completely ignoring Michael, "look me in the eyes and tell me this is coming from your heart, not his mouth." But she couldn't. She looked away at the floor, at her new shoes, at anywhere but me. At that moment, I knew my daughter was lost, that the girl who used to hug me when I came home tired from work, who told me I was her hero, had been replaced by this cold woman who spoke with borrowed words. "The decision is made, Mom," she murmured without looking up. "Please don't make this any more difficult than it already is." More difficult for whom? I wanted to ask. For her, who was rejecting the purest love she had ever known in her life, or for me, who was watching my world crumble in real time. "Okay," I finally said with a calm I didn't know where it came from. "If that's what you want." I set the box of cupcakes on the floor by her feet. I didn't bend down to pick them up when a few fell out onto the ground. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked toward the elevator with my dignity intact, even though I was bleeding on the inside. It was in the elevator, as the lights of the floors flickered descending, that I made the decision that would change everything. If my daughter had chosen to cut me out of her life, Then I would make decisions too. Decisions she would understand very soon because actions have consequences. And the following Monday, she was going to discover exactly what hers were. 3 months earlier, everything had been different. Laura had arrived at my house one Sunday in March with cheeks flushed from excitement and an engagement ring that shone on her finger like a promise of happiness. She had rushed toward me with the strongest hug she had given me in years, shouting, "Mom, I'm getting married!" With a voice broken by joy and tears, I had cried with her, of course. We had danced in my small kitchen like we used to when she was a little girl, spinning between the old chairs and the table where we had shared thousands of meals. That day, I made her favorite dish, chicken stew with yellow rice, and she ate 2 servings while she told me every detail of Michael's proposal. "It was at the park where we had our first date," she said with sparkling eyes, gesturing with her fork full of rice. "He knelt by the lake and there were rose petals everywhere. Mom, I've never seen anything so beautiful." The light of the sunset came in through my kitchen window, that window that needed repair but which I always postponed because there were more important things to spend money on. In that moment, with my daughter radiant in front of me telling me about her future, that golden light made everything seem perfect. Even the cracks in the walls looked romantic, as if they were part of a vintage painting. "I want you to be my maid of honor," she had said suddenly, taking my hands across the table. "There is no one more important in my life than you. Without you, none of this would have been possible." I had squeezed her hands, feeling the softness of her young skin against the roughness of mine, marked by years of hard work. "Of course, my love. It will be the greatest honor of my life." That night, after she left, I took out my savings book and calculated how much I could contribute to the wedding. It wasn't much, but I could help with the flowers, or maybe the dress. I had been saving to change the mattress on my bed, which was over 10 years old and hurt my back. But weddings were more important than comfort. Children were always more important than everything else. Over the next few weeks, Laura came religiously every Sunday. She brought bridal magazines, fabric swatches, and photos of cakes she had found online. My dining room table became our planning headquarters, covered in flower catalogs and lists written in her careful, rounded handwriting. I truly wonder if you were in my place. What would you do? Would you choose to be quiet to maintain peace? Or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. "Look at this church, Mom," she said, pointing to a photo in a magazine. "Isn't it beautiful? It has old stained glass windows and smells like jasmine." I felt a pang imagining her walking down that aisle in her white dress, radiant and happy. I imagined myself in the front row in the new dress I had started looking for at discount stores, wiping away tears of happiness as I watched her become a wife. But there was something that bothered me, something I couldn't quite define. Michael had started to accompany her on some of those Sunday visits. At first, I thought it was normal for a fiancé to want to get to know his future mother-in-law better, but there was something in the way he looked at me, as if he were evaluating me, cataloging me, finding flaws. It was subtle at first, seemingly innocent comments about my house. "Don't you think Laura deserves something bigger when she comes to visit you?" he had said once, observing my small living room with its old but well-cared-for furniture. Or when he tasted my food. "It's good, but maybe it needs less salt. Laura has to watch her blood pressure." Laura laughed at these comments. She brushed them off with a wave of her hand, but I noticed how she absorbed them, how she processed them. I saw how she began to look at my house with different eyes, as if she suddenly realized that the curtains were faded, that the sofa had a stain that I had never been able to completely remove, that my refrigerator made noise when the motor turned on. "Michael's right," she had said one Sunday, almost to herself. "This house is too small for when we have kids. There's no space for the grandkids to play." Grandkids. The word had excited me so much that I overlooked the comment about the size of my house. Grandkids running down these narrow hallways, filling these silent corners with laughter. I had started dreaming about that, about being a grandmother, about having little arms that would hug me as Laura's once had. But Sundays started to change. Laura arrived later and left earlier. Her hugs became mechanical and her smiles forced. She stopped asking for my opinion on the wedding preparations and started talking about decisions she had already made with Michael, as if I were just a spectator instead of her confidant. "We've already chosen the menu," she announced one Sunday without showing me options, without asking me what I thought. "Michael knows an incredible restaurant that's going to handle everything." I nodded, trying to hide the pang of pain I felt. I had been imagining myself cooking something special for her wedding. Maybe my famous empanadas that she had always loved, or the flan that I had perfected over the years. But apparently, my food was no longer good enough for the most important event of her life. I should have noticed the signs. I should have realized that Michael wasn't just getting to know his future mother-in-law, but evaluating how easy it would be to pull Laura away from me. It was in April when I started to notice that something was fundamentally wrong. Laura arrived that Sunday with a strange attitude, almost nervous. She sat on my sofa without taking off her jacket, as if she didn't plan to stay long. Her eyes avoided mine, and when I asked her if she wanted coffee, she told me she had already had some somewhere else. "Somewhere else?" I asked, surprised. We always had breakfast together on Sundays. It had been our tradition for years. "Yeah, Michael and I went to that new cafe near his apartment," she replied casually. But I could hear the tension in her voice. "He wanted me to meet his mother, Sandra." Sandra? The name pierced my chest like a sliver. Why was my daughter having breakfast with Michael's mother instead of me? Why did this woman have access to the Sunday mornings that had been ours for so long? "Oh," was all I could manage to say, trying to stay composed. "And what's she like?" Laura perked up for the first time all afternoon. Her eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. "She's incredible, Mom. So elegant, so sophisticated. She lives in a beautiful apartment in the northern part of town with an ocean view, and she bakes amazing things. You should try her homemade croissants." Homemade croissants. While I had been baking the same chocolate cupcakes she had loved since she was a little girl, another woman was impressing her with French croissants. I felt like a peasant compared to a princess. "She gave us incredible advice about the wedding," Laura continued, now completely absorbed in her story. "She says small, intimate weddings are much more elegant than big celebrations, that it's better to have few guests, but high-quality ones." High-quality guests. The words floated in the air like an invisible poison. I knew very few people who could be considered high quality, according to the standards my daughter was apparently adopting. My friends from the hospital, the neighbors in the neighborhood, the few relatives we had left after so many years of moving and financial difficulties. "And how many people are you thinking of inviting?" I asked, even though I already feared the answer. "Well, Sandra says 50 people is the perfect number, enough to be special, but not so many that it becomes vulgar." Vulgar. Another word was added to the arsenal of terms that were redefining our world. My daughter, who had grown up at neighborhood block parties where the whole street celebrated together, now spoke of elegance and vulgarity, as if she had been born in a mansion. 50 people. I repeated, doing mental calculations. Our family, my friends, the people who had been present in her life as she grew up. We were many more than 50. And how are you going to choose who gets to go and who doesn't? Laura squirmed uncomfortably in her seat. Well, obviously the immediate family will be there, and Michael and I's closest friends. Sandra is going to help me make the list. Sandra was going to help her make the list. Sandra, who had known my daughter for only a few months, was going to decide which of the people who had watched her grow up deserved to be at her wedding. I, who had raised her alone, apparently had no say in that decision. "What about Mrs. Miller?" I asked, referring to our lifelong neighbor who had taken care of Laura when I had to work double shifts. "And the ladies from the hospital who always ask about you?" "Mom, we can't invite everyone," Laura said with a sigh, as if I were a spoiled child who didn't understand the complexities of adult life. "Sandra says you have to be selective, that a wedding is a reflection of who you are as a couple." A reflection of who they were as a couple. Apparently, my daughter and Michael were people who weren't reflected in simple, hard-working folks like Mrs. Miller or my co-workers from the hospital. They were reflected in homemade croissants and apartments with ocean views. That Sunday, when Laura left, I stayed sitting on my sofa for hours, staring at the door she had gone out of. The house felt different, smaller, poorer, more inadequate. For the first time in years, I saw my home through critical eyes. The curtains I had sewn on myself to save money, the furniture I had bought second-hand but had cared for with so much love, the modest decorations I had collected over the years. Everything suddenly seemed insufficient. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake thinking about Sandra, imagining her in her elegant apartment, planning my daughter's wedding as if it were her own. I imagined her convincing Laura that I wasn't sophisticated enough for her new life, that my unconditional love was actually a burden, that my presence at her wedding would detract from the event's elegance. And for the first time in 28 years of being a single mother, I felt truly alone. I didn't know that this feeling of loneliness was only the beginning. I didn't know that Sandra and Michael had begun a systematic campaign to erase me from my daughter's life. I didn't know that every Sunday that passed, every seemingly innocent conversation, was one more piece in the puzzle of my destruction. But I was about to find out very soon. May arrived with a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. Laura began skipping our traditional Sundays. First, it was a valid excuse. "I have to go with Michael to try the wedding cake." Then another. "Sandra is organizing a family lunch and I can't miss it." And then she simply stopped coming without giving any explanation. I would call her and she would reply with short texts. "I'm busy with preparations, Mom. I'll call you later." But later never came. When I finally managed to talk to her on the phone, her voice sounded distant, as if she were reading a script written by someone else. "How are the dress preparations going?" I asked one afternoon, trying to maintain the connection we had always had. "Have you decided if you want me to go with you to the final fitting?" There was a long, uncomfortable pause. "I already went, Mom. Sandra went with me. She has very good taste in these things." Sandra, again. Sandra had been present at the moment my daughter tried on her wedding dress, one of the most intimate and important moments in any woman's life. I, who had dreamed of that moment since Laura was a little girl playing dress-up with my old dresses, had been replaced by a woman who had known my daughter for only a few months. "Laura," I said, trying not to let my voice break, "I feel like you're leaving me out of everything. This is your wedding, but it's also one of the most important moments of my life as your mother. It's not about you, Mom, she replied with a coldness that cut me like a knife. It's about Michael and me, about our future together. But I'm your mother, I insisted, feeling a knot in my throat. I love you more than my own life. I just want to be a part of your happiness. That's exactly the problem, she said, and her voice had taken on a tone I didn't recognize. You've always made everything revolve around your love for me. It's overwhelming, Mom. It's emotional manipulation. There it was again, that phrase, emotional manipulation. The words Michael had planted in her head like poisonous seeds. My unconditional love, all the sacrifices I had made for her, the sleepless nights taking care of her when she was sick, the extra jobs to pay for her studies, all of it now had a psychological label that turned it into something toxic. Since when is loving your daughter manipulation? I asked, but the line was already dead. Laura had hung up. I stood there with the phone in my hand for several minutes, listening to the dial tone as if it were the sound of my heart breaking. My daughter had just turned 28 years of maternal love into a diagnosis from a cheap psychology textbook. That night, I decided to do something I had never done before. I searched on the internet for what was happening. I typed emotional manipulation into Google and read article after article about toxic parents, conditional love, and emotional dependency. With every paragraph I read, I recognized myself less in those descriptions. But I began to understand the arsenal of arguments that Michael had used to convince my daughter that I was the problem. According to these articles, everything I had done out of love could be reinterpreted as manipulation. My financial sacrifices became guilt-tripping. My constant worry was transformed into excessive control. My desire to be present in her life was redefined as a violation of boundaries. It was brilliant, really. Michael had taken the purest and most selfless relationship that existed in Laura's life and had turned it into something sick. He had managed to make my daughter see the love that had sustained her all her life as pathological. 3 days later, I received a call that confirmed my worst suspicions. It was Mrs. Miller, my lifelong neighbor. "Anna," she said with a worried voice, "I just saw something that has me really upset. I was at the grocery store and I ran into Laura and that young man of hers. When I said hello, he looked at me like I was a cockroach and told Laura they were in a hurry. But what hurt me was that Laura didn't even smile at me, honey. She treated me like she didn't know me." Mrs. Miller had been like a second grandmother to Laura. She had taken care of her countless afternoons when I was working. She had taught her how to make empanadas. She had been present at every birthday and every graduation. For Laura to treat her like a stranger was a betrayal not only to Mrs. Miller, but to her own history. "And there's something else," Mrs. Miller continued. "I overheard him say to her, 'See, this is why it's better to keep your distance from these people. Anna, that young man is filling your daughter's head with garbage.'" These people. Michael was referring to the people who had raised Laura, who had loved her, who had been there when he didn't even exist in her life, as those people. And my daughter was allowing it. That night, I made a decision. I was going to go to Laura's apartment the next day. I was going to confront this situation head-on, to talk to my daughter without Michael's interference, to remind her who she was before he came and distorted her perception of reality. I didn't know that Michael and Sandra had anticipated that exact reaction. I didn't know they had prepared Laura for that moment, filling her head with arguments about healthy boundaries and invasive parents. I didn't know that when I went to look for my daughter to save her, I would find a stranger in her place who had rehearsed the exact words to destroy me. But I was about to find out. On Wednesday morning, I arrived at Laura's apartment without warning. I had decided it was time for an honest, face-to-face conversation, without the mediation of phones or messages that could be misinterpreted. I carried a folder with photographs of her as a child, hoping that the images of our past together could break the spell Michael had woven around her. I rang the doorbell and waited. I heard footsteps on the other side, murmured voices, and then a long silence before the door finally opened. Laura appeared in the doorway, but she didn't invite me in. She stood blocking the entrance with an expression I had never seen on her face, a mixture of guilt and determination that chilled my blood. "Mom, you can't just show up without warning," she told me, and her voice had that rehearsed cadence I had learned to recognize. Michael and I were talking about something important. "That's exactly why I came," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I think we also need to talk about something important. About us. About what's happening between you and me." I could see Michael appear behind her like a protective shadow. He didn't say anything, but his presence was a declaration. He was there to make sure Laura didn't deviate from the script they had prepared. "Okay," Laura said after a moment, "but I only have a few minutes. We have to go out soon." We sat in her living room, but the atmosphere was so tense it felt like we were in a lawyer's office instead of my daughter's home. Michael settled into a chair near us, pretending to read something on his phone, but I knew he was monitoring every word we said. "Laura," I began, opening the photo folder, "I want you to see something." I pulled out a photo of her when she was 7 years old at her first school performance. She was dressed as a butterfly with golden wings that I had made with aluminum foil and a lot of patience. In the photo, she was hugging me after the show with a smile so big it looked like it was going to fall off her face. "Do you remember this day?" I asked. "I worked all night to make those wings. You told me I was the most creative mom in the world." Laura looked at the photo, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the little girl she had been. Her eyes softened. Her defenses dropped for just a second. But then she looked at Michael, as if asking for permission to feel nostalgic, and the wall went back up. "Mom, that was a long time ago," she said, gently pushing the photo toward me. "People change. I've changed." "Have you changed? Or have they made you change?" I asked, unable to hold back anymore. "Laura, you aren't like this. You weren't cold, you weren't ungrateful. What have they done to you?" Michael looked up from his phone for the first time. "No one has done anything to Laura. She's growing up, she's learning to set healthy boundaries. It's normal for a woman her age to want to be independent of her parents' excessive influence." Excessive influence. Another phrase from the manual they had been using to rewrite our history. "Excessive influence?" I repeated. "You call raising her alone excessive influence? Working 2 jobs so she could study? Selling my jewelry to pay for her college?" "Exactly that," Michael said with a smile that made my skin crawl. "Laura never asked you for those sacrifices. You made them to create an emotional debt so that she would feel obligated to keep you in her life forever." Emotional debt. Maternal love turned into a commercial transaction. Everything I had done out of love now had a calculated price, a hidden intention. According to Michael's twisted logic, I hadn't been a loving mother, but a calculating manipulator. "Laura," I said, completely ignoring Michael, "look me in the eyes and tell me you really believe that. Tell me you believe that everything I did for you was to manipulate you." My daughter avoided my gaze. She twisted her hands in her lap, a nervous gesture she had made since she was a child when she knew she was doing something wrong. But when she finally spoke, her words were like knives. "I think, without realizing it, yes," she murmured. "I think you've made me feel guilty my whole life for your sacrifices. Every time I wanted to do something on my own, you reminded me of everything you had done for me." "When?" I asked, feeling my voice break. "When did I remind you of my sacrifices to make you feel guilty?" Laura was silent. She searched her memory for examples of the manipulation she was accusing me of, but she couldn't find any because they had never existed. I had never thrown what I had done for her in her face. My sacrifices had been silent, proud, loving. It was Michael who filled the silence. It doesn't have to be explicit, Anna. Emotional manipulation is often subtle. It's the way you sigh when she makes independent decisions, the way you make her feel guilty for having her own life. Sighs. My natural sadness at seeing her grow up and move away had become manipulation. My maternal nostalgia was now a psychological weapon. Michael had taken every human gesture and twisted it until it became something monstrous. At that moment, I understood that I had lost not my daughter, but the battle for her mind. Michael had been smarter, more systematic, more convincing. He had used the language of modern psychology to make love seem like a disease, to make maternal devotion seem like a pathology. I stood up from the chair with what little dignity I had left. "Okay," I said. "If that's what you believe, there's nothing more to talk about." As I walked toward the door, Laura followed me. For a moment, I thought she was going to stop me, that she was going to remember who we really were. But when she got close, she just said, "Mom, I hope you'll understand someday that this is what's best for everyone." What's best for everyone? The final phrase from a daughter who had learned to justify cruelty with therapeutic jargon. I left that apartment knowing the war was over, but also knowing that even though I had lost the battle for my daughter's heart, I still had cards to play. That same afternoon, as I walked back to my house with a broken heart and the photo folder clutched to my chest, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to wait for my daughter to remember who I was. I wasn't going to beg for a place in her life. If Michael had managed to convince her that I was toxic, that it was time for her to experience life without my supposed toxicity. I got home and took out all the documents I had saved in my desk. Insurance policies, property titles, my will, savings accounts. For years, I had planned my life with Laura as my only heir, and the person who would benefit from everything I had built with so much effort. Every dollar I had saved, every investment I had made, every financial decision had been made with the goal of securing a better future for her. But if she didn't consider me part of her future, then I wouldn't consider her part of mine. I took out my phone and called George, a lawyer I knew from the hospital where I worked. His wife had been my shift partner for years, and I knew he was a trustworthy person. "George," I said when he answered, "I need to make some changes to my legal documents. Could you see me tomorrow?" "Of course, Anna, is everything okay?" "Everything is changing," I replied. "I need to change some things too." That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed sitting in my kitchen, drinking tea and looking at the photographs I had brought to Laura's apartment. Every image was a reminder of what we had been, of the connection that had existed between us before Michael came and poisoned her mind. There was a photo of Laura when she was 12, the day she graduated from elementary school. I was wearing my hospital uniform because I had to rush from work to make it to the ceremony. In the picture, she was hugging me with so much love that it seemed like she wanted to melt into me. On the back of the photo, in her childish handwriting, she had written, To the best mom in the world, I love you to the moon and back. To the moon and back. Those had been our special words, our way of telling each other how much we loved one another. How had we gone from that to don't come to my wedding? The next morning, I arrived early at George's office. I had a clear list of what I wanted to change. My will, my life insurance policies, the bank accounts where Laura was listed as a beneficiary, everything. "Are you sure about this, Anna?" George asked me as he reviewed my requests. "These are permanent changes. Once we modify these documents, Laura will no longer have rights to any of your assets." "Completely sure," I replied. "My daughter has decided that I'm toxic to her life. Well, then my money should be too." George looked at me with understanding. He had seen many cases of families torn apart by psychological manipulation and recognized the patterns. "And who do you want to name as a beneficiary?" I had thought about that all night. The Children's Foundation at the hospital where I work, and Mrs. Miller, my neighbor. She has been more of a family to me in the last few months than my own daughter. I signed each document with a steady hand. Each signature was an act of liberation, a declaration of emotional independence. If Laura wanted a life without my influence, she would have it completely, without my presence, without my emotional support, and without my inheritance. But there was something else I needed to do. That afternoon, I went to the bank and withdrew all the money I had been saving to contribute to Laura's wedding. It was 5 years of sacrifices, of deprivations, of extra jobs, money I had saved dollar by dollar, thinking about making my daughter happy on the most important day of her life. With that money, I bought a plane ticket to Italy. I had dreamed for years of getting to know the land of my grandparents, but I had always postponed the trip because there were more important things to spend money on. There had always been something Laura needed, some way to invest in her future instead of my own. But not anymore. If she was going to start her married life without drama or toxicity, I was also going to start a new stage of my life. A stage where my decisions were my own, where my money was for my dreams, where I didn't have to justify every dollar spent on my own happiness. I booked the flight for the Monday after her wedding. It would be my gift to myself. While she was celebrating her new life without me, I would be starting mine without her. That night, I received a call from Laura. My heart sped up, thinking that maybe she had reconsidered, that maybe she wanted to apologize, but when I answered, her voice was cold and practical. "Mom, I need you to confirm the address of the church where you were baptized. Michael wants us to have all the complete religious documentation for the ceremony." Religious documentation. My daughter was asking me for information for her wedding as if I were a government office, not her mother, as if my only value was to provide data to fill out forms. "Why do you need that information?" I asked. "It's a requirement from the church where we're getting married. They need the baptism certificate and some other documents." "Laura," I said slowly, "you're asking me to help you with the paperwork for a wedding I'm not invited to." There was a long silence. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded annoyed. "Mom, please don't be so dramatic. It's just information I need." "Don't be so dramatic." My feelings had been reduced to unnecessary drama. My maternal pain was simply an inconvenient exaggeration. "I don't have that information on hand," I lied. "You'll have to look for it yourself." I hung up before she could respond. It was the first time in 28 years that I had denied my daughter something, and it felt like the first true act of freedom in my adult life. On the Saturday of her wedding, while she was getting ready for the most important day of her life without me, I would be packing for the most important trip of mine. On the Friday before the wedding, While Laura was surely at her bachelorette party, surrounded by the sophisticated friends Michael had approved of, I was in my kitchen packing the last memories of a life I was leaving behind. I had decided to sell the house. It was too big for one woman alone, and every corner reminded me of the daughter I had lost long before she forbade me from going to her wedding. Mrs. Miller came to help me pack. Her wrinkled hands touched each object with the tenderness of someone who understood the weight of memories. When we found the shoebox full of letters Laura had written to me when she was a child, we both fell silent. "Read one," Mrs. Miller asked me, sitting next to me on the living room floor. I pulled one out at random. It was from when Laura was 10, written on notebook paper with a purple pencil. "Dear Mommy," it said in her round, childish handwriting. "Thank you for working so hard so I can have everything I need. When I grow up, I'm going to take care of you like you take care of me. I'm going to buy you a big house with a yard, and we're going to live together forever. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." Mrs. Miller squeezed my hand as tears rolled down my cheeks. "That little girl is still in there," she said. "She's just lost." I didn't answer. I put the letter back in the box. That girl died the day she told me not to come to her wedding, and I can't keep crying for someone who no longer exists. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I found a man I didn't know. He was young, perhaps Laura's age, in a formal suit and with an awkward smile. "Mrs. Jackson?" he asked. "I'm Mark, Michael's cousin. I'm here on behalf of Laura." My heart stopped for a moment. She had reconsidered. She had sent this man to invite me to the wedding after all. "Laura wanted me to give you this," he said, extending a white envelope, "and to tell you that she hopes you'll understand." I took the envelope with trembling hands. Mark left quickly, as if he wanted to flee the scene. I closed the door and stood in the hallway looking at my name written in Laura's handwriting on the front of the envelope. Inside was a 2-page letter and something else, a photograph. It was the same photo I had brought to her apartment, the one of her when she was 7 years old, dressed as a butterfly. But now there was something written on the back in blue ink. "Thanks for everything you did, but I'm not that little girl anymore." I read the letter with my heart breaking with every word. Laura had written a formal, cold goodbye, full of the psychological phrases Michael had taught her. She talked about closing chapters, codependent relationships, and unhealthy love. It ended by telling me she hoped that someday I could heal and find my own happiness without emotionally depending on her. Emotionally depending on her. My maternal love had been diagnosed as a disease that needed a cure. That night, as I burned the letter in the sink in my kitchen, I made the final decision. Not only would I go to Italy after her wedding, I would move there permanently. I had been researching for the past few weeks and had found a small town in Tuscany where I could buy a house with the money from the sale of mine, a place where no one knew my story, where I could start over. Saturday dawned sunny, a perfect day for a wedding. I thought ironically while drinking my morning coffee. Laura must be waking up in her apartment, maybe with butterflies in her stomach, excited for the day she had dreamed of since she was a little girl. Only that dream no longer included me. At 10 a.m., which was exactly the time the ceremony was supposed to begin, I was sitting in Mrs. Miller's garden, helping her plant tomatoes. I had decided not to be at my house during the wedding. I didn't want to run the risk that nostalgia would make me do something stupid, like show up at the church. "Doesn't it hurt to be doing this right now?" Mrs. Miller asked me as we stirred the soil. "It hurts to breathe," I admitted. "But the pain isn't going to change what's happening. At least here, I'm doing something useful." At 11:30, while Laura was probably saying, "I do," to Michael, I was watering the plants with the tears I couldn't hold back. But they weren't tears of self-pity. They were tears of grief. I was burying the daughter I had known and loved and saying goodbye to the mother I had been for 28 years. That afternoon, while the wedding reception was surely at its peak, I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. The ceremony was beautiful. Laura looked radiant. Sandra handled everything perfectly. It was clearly from someone who knew I hadn't been there, someone who wanted to make sure I knew that my absence hadn't ruined anything, that Sandra had perfectly filled my place as a maternal figure on the most important day of my daughter's life. I deleted the message without responding, but a strange smile appeared on my face. Because whoever had sent that message didn't know that on Monday morning, Laura was going to discover that decisions have consequences, that rejecting a mother doesn't just mean losing her presence at a wedding, but losing everything that mother had built for her daughter's future. On Sunday, I packed the last suitcase. Early Monday, I would leave for Italy, but first, I had an appointment at the bank and at George's office. It was time for my daughter to learn that maternal love isn't infinite when it's not reciprocated. Monday dawned gray, as if the sky knew it was a day of reckoning. I got up at 5 a.m., put on my best navy blue suit, and went to the bank as soon as they opened. I had 3 appointments scheduled before my afternoon flight: the bank, George's office, and one last stop that Laura would never see coming. At the bank, the manager, who had attended to me for years, looked at me with a worried expression as she processed the transfers I had requested. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Jackson? It's a considerable amount of money." "Completely sure," I replied, signing each document with a steady hand. "I want everything transferred today." I was closing all the accounts where Laura had access, including the joint savings account we had opened when she turned 18. An account that contained not only my savings, but also the money I had inherited when my mother died 3 years ago, money that I had kept intact, saving it for Laura's future, for her house, for her children, for any emergencies that might arise in her married life. But a daughter who considers her mother toxic clearly doesn't need that mother's toxic money. My second stop was George's office. He had all the final documents ready: the new will, the changes to the insurance policies, the transfer of the house's ownership to the real estate company that would be responsible for selling it in my absence. "The house papers are in order," George informed me. "The real estate company has full authorization to handle the sale. When you return from Italy, you'll have the money deposited in your new account." "And what if I don't return?" I asked. "What if I decide to stay there permanently?" George looked at me with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "Then you'll truly be starting a new life." Exactly. My third stop was the most important. I went to the flower shop where Laura had worked during her summer vacations when she was in college. The owner, Carolyn, knew me well and knew the whole story of what had happened. "Caroline," I said, "I need you to do a very special favor for me." "Anything you need, Anna. I want you to send a floral arrangement to Laura this afternoon. White roses, her favorites, with a card that says, 'Congratulations on your marriage. May you have the independent life you so desired. With love, Mom.'" Caroline frowned. "Are you sure about that message?" "Completely. And Caroline, after today, if Laura comes to ask about me or for my address, you don't know anything, okay?" "Okay," she nodded, though I could see the concern in her eyes. At 2 p.m., I was at the airport waiting for my flight to Rome. My heart was calm for the first time in months. It wasn't happiness, but it was peace. The peace that comes when you finally stop fighting against the inevitable. My phone rang as they were announcing the boarding for my flight. It was an unknown number, but I guessed who it was before I answered. Mom. Laura's voice sounded confused, almost panicked. Where are you? I went to the bank and they told me you closed all the accounts. I don't understand what's happening. Hello, Laura, I replied uncalmly. How was the honeymoon? The honeymoon? Mom, we didn't go on a honeymoon. We were going to use the money from the savings account for the trip. But when Michael went to the bank this morning, they told him the account was closed. What did you do? There it was. The first moment my daughter understood that actions have consequences, that excluding a mother from your life also means excluding everything that mother had built for you. I did exactly what you asked me to do, I said as I walked toward the boarding gate. I removed myself completely from your life. What are you talking about? I never asked you to close the accounts. No, not in those words, I admitted. But you told me you didn't need me anymore, that I was toxic to your life. Well, my money must be toxic too then. There was a long silence. I could hear voices in the background, probably Michael asking what was going on. Mom, this is ridiculous, she finally said. But her voice had lost the calculated coldness of the past few weeks. Now she sounded like the scared little girl she had been when she got lost at the supermarket. You can't do this. I can. And I did, I replied. For 28 years, I made all my decisions thinking about you. Every dollar I saved, every investment I made, every sacrifice I accepted, it was all for your future. But you decided that future didn't include me. So, I decided that my money doesn't include you either. Where's the inheritance money from Grandma? She asked. And for the first time, I could hear real panic in her voice. Donated to the Children's Foundation at the hospital where I work. Children who do need help, who do value it when someone takes care of them. They announced the final call for my flight. It was time for me to go. Laura, I said, I wish you all the happiness in the world with Michael and Sandra. I hope you have the sophisticated and elegant life you wanted without the toxicity of a hard-working mother who embarrassed you. But I hope it's a life you build yourselves without my help. Mom, wait, she cried. But I had already hung up. I turned off my phone and got on the plane. As we took off and I watched the city get smaller below us, I didn't feel sadness. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the freedom of being the owner of my own life. Somewhere in that city, Laura was probably crying, understanding for the first time the true cost of having chosen Michael's manipulation over her mother's unconditional love. But it was already too late for tears. 6 months later, I was sitting in the small cafe in my town in Tuscany, reading a book under the golden afternoon sun, when my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. During these months, I had changed my number 3 times, but somehow Laura always managed to find me. Mom, please, I need to talk to you. Terrible things have happened. Michael left me. Sandra turned out to be a liar. I lost my job. I have no one. Please, answer me. I read the message twice and then deleted it without responding. It wasn't cruelty. It was self-preservation. For 6 months, I had received dozens of similar messages. First, they had been furious, full of accusations about how I had sabotaged her marriage by withdrawing the money. Then they had been pleading, promising we could fix things if I came back. Then, they had been manipulative, using my maternal guilt to try to force me to rescue her once more. But that maternal guilt no longer existed. I had buried it the day I got on the plane. My new life in Rada was simple and beautiful. I had bought a small stone house with an ocean view with a little garden where I grew tomatoes and herbs. I worked part-time at the local clinic, taking care of the elderly people in the town who treated me with the respect and affection my own daughter had never known how to value. Mrs. Bianchi, my 75-year-old neighbor, had adopted me as the daughter she never had. Every afternoon, we had tea on her terrace, and she told me stories about the town, about the families who had lived here for generations, about the children who had gone to the city and never returned. "Don't you miss your old life?" she had asked me once. "I miss the daughter I thought I had replied. "But I don't miss the pain of loving someone who didn't love me back." That afternoon, after deleting Laura's message, I went for a walk on the beach as I did every afternoon. The Ligurian Sea was especially beautiful, with gentle waves lapping at the golden sand. On the horizon, the sun began to paint itself orange, promising a spectacular sunset. It was there, as I walked barefoot along the shore, that I remembered something I had forgotten for months of pain. What it felt like to be happy. Not the conditional happiness I had lived with for years, that joy that depended on whether Laura called me, whether she needed me, whether she included me in her plans, but a happiness of my own, an independent joy that was born from the simple pleasure of being alive, of breathing salty air, of feeling the sand between my toes. That night, as I prepared a simple dinner for myself, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Miller from Chicago. "Anna, I have news," she said without preamble. "Laura came looking for your address. She's desperate. It seems that Michael left her for a younger woman, and Sandra disappeared when the money ran out. She's living in a tiny apartment, working at a call center." I listened to the information without feeling anything. Not satisfaction at poetic justice, not pain for her suffering, just nothing. "Are you going to contact her?" Mrs. Miller asked me. "No," I replied. "I'm no longer the mother who runs to rescue her daughter every time she makes a mistake. That woman died the day I was forbidden from going to a wedding, and if she's really learned her lesson and now values what she lost, then let her learn to live with the consequences of her decisions," I said with a tranquility that surprised me, just like I did. I hung up and finished my dinner in silence. Then I went out to the garden and sat in the wicker chair I had bought at the local market. The stars began to appear in the Tuscan sky, brighter and clearer than I had ever seen them in the city. I thought about the woman I had been for 28 years, a woman who had lived for another person, who had measured her worth by how necessary she was to her daughter, who had confused love with constant sacrifice. That woman had died of sadness and disappointment in an apartment where she was rejected. But from her ashes, this new version of me had been born. A woman who ate breakfast when she was hungry, who read books she liked, who bought flowers for her own house, who had deep conversations with friends who valued her. A woman who had learned that self-love is not selfishness, but survival. My phone vibrated once more. Another message from Laura. "Mom, I know you're reading this. I just want you to know that I understand. I understood everything. I forgive you." I laughed out loud, breaking the silence of the night. She forgave me. The daughter who had expelled me from her life, who had chosen strangers over me, who had turned my love into pathology, was now forgiving me. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. Tomorrow would be another beautiful day in my new life. A day that belonged entirely to me, without the golden chains of unreciprocated love. Laura had chosen to learn life's lessons late. I had chosen to learn the lessons of freedom early. And for the first time in decades, when I looked toward the future, I didn't see my daughter's face. I saw my own smiling. I had won something much more valuable than a wedding or a forgiveness. I had won my own life. I would never give it away again. The names and places in this story have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We do not share this to judge, but in the hope that someone will pause and reflect on how many mothers are silently suffering within their own homes. I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to preserve peace, or would you dare to confront everything in order to reclaim your voice? I long to hear your thoughts, because every story is like a candle that can light the path for someone else. I firmly believe that God always blesses, and that courage leads us toward brighter days. As we close, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I am certain they will surprise and inspire you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.